Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela.
Paddy, that was not in my diary for the 3rd of January 2026. Was it in yours?
No, I woke up to the news like the whole world this morning. It's about 6 o'clock our time that the reports started coming through.
That Donald Trump had ordered strikes on the Venezuelan capital. Not just ordering strikes on the Venezuelan capital, we know he'd been cranking up the pressure on that country for some time, but also it emerged then America had captured its leader, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife.
And then as the day wore on, a news conference in which Donald Trump said two things, more we can discuss. We are going to run Venezuela and we are going to pump its oil. Welcome to the first Saturday newscast of 2026.
It's Laura in the studio.
It's Paddy in the studio.
And I'm delighted to say with us today is
Lyse in the studio. And I woke up this morning all ready to talk about President Trump's threats to intervene militarily in Iran, only to find out that he'd already intervened militarily in Venezuela. Welcome to 2026.
So what do we know then, Lyse, in terms, it's been a very fast-moving story. So if people are listening to this and it's coming into their ears late on Saturday, or they can't sleep in the middle of the night and they haven't really been watching the news. So what can we tell people as we record at 5:30 UK time?
For months, there has been a military build-up, US military build-up in the Caribbean and in parts of the Pacific around off the coast of Venezuela, with attacks on what are said to be the vessels used by Venezuelan narco-traffickers, even seizing of some oil vessels. Then a few days ago, there was an attack that President Trump admitted, attack on Venezuelan land, a docking facility, again said to be connected to alleged drug traffickers. So the pressure was building. But this came completely out of the blue this morning. In the dead of night, there were suddenly loud explosions. And Caracas is in a valley, so they were thunderous explosions. And we started hearing on the BBC Venezuelans telling us we were woken up by loud booms. And then slowly it became clear that there had been US military strikes on major military bases in Venezuela. And then as the day went on, as we started hearing more details, including, as you say, this press conference, which as we record is still going on, some of those attacks, those strikes seem to have been diversionary in that there had been a well-rehearsed operation, a sting operation to extract Nicolas Maduro from his fortress along with his wife, a special team, Delta Force, and they had rehearsed this for months, we understand, from President Trump. They had actually done a mock-up of where he was, how to go in and out. He's about to land, as we record, in New York, where he will soon be put on trial. And so what do we have now? At a moment where President Trump it's absolutely jaw-dropping, is saying that now the United States is going to run Venezuela. But in Caracas, the people who were the closest, the most powerful people next to Nicolas Maduro are still there. The defense minister, the vice president, the interior minister, they're still being defiant. Where are they going to go? And the Venezuelan opposition is also saying they should be actually moving into this power vacuum. So the big question of what next is a moment fraught with risk.
We know that the helicopters flew in at 100 feet above the ground. We had that from the news briefing. It could have happened 4 days ago, but the weather was bad. They know they've been sending this strike force off the coast of Venezuela for weeks. It's been sitting there. President Trump said that should have warned the Venezuelan president we were coming. Then he's been pictured in cuffs and blindfold. And this is what the US president said would happen in Venezuela. This is from the news conference.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about.
I mean, President Trump's critics would say he's not judicious about anything. And they would say that the reason he's not been judicious about this is that by international law, it's very clear, unless there is an imminent threat or it's self-defense, essentially, unless you're being attacked by a country, it's not legal for one state to go in and drop bombs on another country, let alone then go in and grab and snatch their leader, in this case, Nicolas Maduro. But Lyse, just if people don't know much about South American politics, and I think there are plenty of us out there, Maduro was democratically elected initially, but over time, tell us how his regime have done some pretty awful things. Who is he?
But let me just pick up on what you said, though, that what President Trump and his officials have been building the case for legal action. They say that they're legally, it's within their legal rights to take the action they have. They have framed this not as regime change, not as extracting a leader, but as taking on a threat to the national security of the United States, saying that there is an armed conflict with these narco traffickers, describing networks in Venezuela as terrorist organizations. So when they will be challenged, and they're already being challenged on the legality of this, they already have they've been making their case. Nicolas Maduro, they would say President Trump's case, the case of his supporters, is that not only is they say he a drug trafficker, but they're not the only ones. Colombia is a country where most of the cocaine is produced. Fentanyl is mostly produced in Mexico. A lot of the drugs go through Ecuador, but they are focusing on Nicolas Maduro, who was indicted many years ago in a court in the United States. But the other charge is that he stole the election of 2024. All of the international assessments were that he lost the election by a very wide margin, and that the person who won is President Edmundo Gonzalez. The Maria Corina Machado, the Nobel Peace Laureate, one of the most prominent Venezuelan opposition leaders, was barred from taking part. She had to go into hiding. So it was Gonzalez who was supposed to become president. Instead, Nicolas Maduro insisted on staying in power, which is why President Trump has continued to say that we can do this the easy way or we can do it the hard way. You simply step down, recognize that you lost the election.
But it's interesting you say the framing of the American argument here is that the way that drugs come through Venezuela and end up on US streets and harming US lives essentially is an attack on the country that gives them the legal threat to go after it.
Because also they've framed it as a law enforcement operation.
Exactly.
So they've said, so they've indicted already Maduro and Mr. and Mrs. Maduro. But just interestingly...
But just I should say that when President Trump spoke on Fox News, he accused Maduro of being responsible for killing 300,000 Americans. Yes, there is a large number of Americans who die from drug-related deaths in the United States. But the criticism is, then why are you singling out Nicolas Maduro? He's just pardoned the former Honduran president who was sentenced to 45 years in prison.
Lyse, let me exemplify this from our newscaster Howard. Hello, team. Happy New Year. Why Donald Trump is claiming that large amounts of drugs come into the USA from Venezuela when the DEA, that's the Drug Enforcement Agency in the US, says the National Drug Thirst Assessment says that Mexico is the source of the majority of drugs into the USA.
Yes, well, this is it. And when you challenge them, they say it is true that it is a transit point for the drugs. But President Trump doesn't have. He's not going after everybody. He's decided to go after Venezuela.
Dare I say oil?
Well, I was just Venezuela just happens to have the greatest number of proven oil reserves.
He has said it. He said we're going to pump it.
And he said this because under Maduro, the amount that's being produced in Venezuela has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. But today, in an extraordinary way, said we're going to send in American companies and we're going to make money and we're going to make loads of money.
We're going to sell it to countries around the world. He was asked at the news conference about China and Russia, and he then segued to say that we will sell this oil to other countries, implying he's going to sell Venezuelan oil to China.
One of the reasons why President Trump's supporters love him so much is that to use the expression, he says the quiet part out loud. There have been decades of accusations against the United States that whenever it goes in, it is to steal the resources of a country. President Trump takes it on head on and says, yeah, that's why we're going in. We want the oil. Strangely, there is an American company operating now in Venezuela, even though Venezuela is sanctioned for oil and they've been attacks by U.S. warplanes on oil tankers. Chevron is operating there under a special license. It was cancelled. Then, after lobbying of President Trump, they were given it back. Venezuela has been seen as a troublesome state for many years, for many American presidents. That goes back to Hugo Chavez. Then, of course, it was followed by Nicolas Maduro, which then raises the question, what happens to what's called Chavismo? Because just because you've taken out Nicolas Maduro doesn't mean you've taken out everything about his policy, his left-wing policies in Latin America.
And in a way, though, it feels to me, not being an expert in this in the way that you are at all, but this is retro, isn't it? This is old-fashioned American, whether you want to call it gunboat diplomacy or whatever.
It happened with...
You go in, whether regimes you don't like, there are decades where this happened in all sorts of smaller countries around the world. The US would go in, institute some kind of disruption in the government, whatever you want to call it. People have different terminologies. But in a way, it feels this is very retro.
It happened with Noriega in Panama.
Yeah.
That was the last time. Yes, 1989.
And
under President Reagan.
He got 20 years in jail, that was what happened to him. So that's a good guide.
And that was under Ronald Reagan. But Lyse, many of our newscasters don't have the blessings of as many years on this planet as we do. So just remind us what was going on there with General Noriega.
Well, that was General Noriega, and that was after the build-up of, but there was a war going on between the United States and Panama, and then they went in and took him out again, accused of being involved in narco trafficking, seen as a threat to the national security of the United States. But Laura, if I could pick up on the point you made, is like, what is this? This seems retro. This seems like they used to use the phrase decades ago when the CIA intervened in one country after the gunboat diplomacy. President Trump gave it a name in his press conference in Mar-a-Lago. He said they call it the Dunroe Doctrine. It was even mentioned in the national security strategy that was put out by the United States late last year, that they are going to revive the 19th century doctrine of President James Monroe when he warned European powers not to meddle in the Western Hemisphere. And here we are, but you talk about going back decades. This is going back centuries. And I have to underline what a difference a year makes. At the beginning of 2025, when President Donald Trump started his second term, in his first foreign tour, he went to Saudi Arabia. I was there listening to him. He made a major foreign policy speech, and he said, those days of us intervening in countries which are not our own, which we don't understand, are over. The days of nation building are over. And then here we are. He has completely upended.
And can I ask you, Lyse, with all your years of experience of covering stories right around the world and all sorts of tense and awkward, dangerous and difficult situations and all sorts of big political characters, given what we know about Donald Trump and how he behaves and how he can be so volatile and swing from one moment to another in a very unpredictable way, are you really surprised that this has happened?
What to say? I think that every day we wake up wondering what President Trump is going to say or do. Yes, he was a democratically elected president. Yes, he was elected by a majority of the people of the United States. Yes, he has good relations with many world leaders, including Sir Keir Starmer. But he continues to shock and to stun. When I was listening to that press conference, and when we were all wondering, we were all asking that question, what next the day after? And he says, we're going to run Venezuela. I had the images of 2003 in Iraq, and I remember arriving there after US and British forces had toppled Saddam Hussein, and how within a day that the Iraqis who were celebrating, when they realized that they would be run by Paul Bremer, by Americans, it turned to protest. And here we are seeing it again, that President Trump is going to send in, well, let's see how he does it, going to send in America. It is absolutely jaw-dropping.
I think that's the answer, yes.
I think that's quite a very, very firm yes.
I've just been speaking before.
I mean, there are good, he did help to get a ceasefire in Gaza, imperfect. He has done things that perhaps, as he likes to say, no other U.S. president can do. He can pick up the phone and talk to President Putin in a way President Biden or others could not do it. But he has really, this American first policy is making America a law unto itself. It is a very, very dangerous time.
So I've just been speaking before we came into the room, the three of us, to John Bolton, who was his national security advisor.
Even he is scared of President Trump.
Well, he raises the same caution as you about how you're going to run Venezuela. What are the Venezuelans going to think about it? And what about the people who are the leaders of the opposition? One of them a Nobel laureate in hiding. But also he said, you know what, don't make it a doctrine. He is so mercurial. The dots are not joined. And I'm not disagreeing with you, Lyse. I'm listening to you, but I'm just repeating what John Bolton said to me moments ago, which is that Trump is every day is a new day.
You're absolutely right. He does, as I said, he's gone from, within months saying he doesn't want to be the president. He said, I want to be the leader who stops wars and doesn't start them. I want to be unified. That was the language of his inauguration speech.
And it's interesting when it comes
crazy upside down world.
And it's interesting when it comes to Ukraine. It does seem that there has been genuine progress in recent weeks on that journey towards peace, but that's a whole other thing. It's worth that. Those contradictions.
No, don't start these on that.
But it's an interesting thing, and that's what's so difficult.
But you've been speaking to our Prime Minister.
Yes, let's go back.
Because world leaders, their flabber is well and truly gassed.
It certainly is, and it's very, very difficult for them. And, we know the extent to which Sir Keir Starmer has poured energy and effort and lavished attention on Donald Trump's White House in order to get things like a trade deal and to have fewer tariffs than other countries and to make sure that relationship is strong. Not least, he hopes to get progress on Ukraine. But it was one of those moments where we were going to sit down with Keir Starmer today for a long interview, a really long interview that we'll show in full tomorrow. But this news was breaking, and you had that sense in Number 10, people sort of rushing around, thinking, something really big is happening. There's calls going on. We're not quite sure. What are we going to be able to say? Of course, we'll have to ask about Venezuela. My goodness, you had that sense that was, there was something happening. But bear in mind, Keir Starmer, big political chum of very unpredictable leader who may have a tricky time with the legalities of this, although as Lyse has told us, they do believe they have a case, alongside international lawyer, Mr. Rules, Keir Starmer, I want everything done by the book. How does he therefore answer the very legitimate question, do you or do you not think that what your big chum was doing is within the bounds of international norms? And lo and behold, Keir Starmer refused to condemn what Donald Trump had done. He didn't want to engage in whether or not it was under international law, although he did sort of say, well, of course, I'm someone who's always taken international law very seriously. But it struck me as just one other of those moments where Keir Starmer, in some ways, has kind of been snookered by his relationship with Donald Trump, which he wants to have and holds as very, very important, but cannot condone this action because of who he is and what his beliefs are. So he can't follow Ed Davey or Zach Polanski, who've both said today this has to be condemned, or even Nigel Farage, who said this might not be a bad thing, but I'm not really sure if it's legal. And this was how Keir Starmer handled it when I spoke to him earlier today.
We need to establish a full picture. I then need to speak to President Trump. I need to speak to our allies. But I don't shy away from this. I've been a lifelong advocate of international law and the importance of compliance with international law. But I want to ensure that I've got all the facts at my disposal, and we haven't got that at the moment, and we need to get that before we come to a decision about the consequences in relation to the actions that have been taken.
But we do know enough here that the US, by its own admission, has struck a sovereign state. They have captured the leader of a sovereign state. Other political leaders in this country have already condemned it. Even Nigel Farage, who I know you have a very dim view of, has said it's probably against international law. So can you say that?
Well, I want to, with the government, we take this very seriously. I want to establish all the facts. That's what we're doing, working within our own teams, working with our US counterparts, and of course I'll want to discuss this with allies. So I'm simply saying my preferred course of action is to make sure I've got all the facts at my disposal in relation to this, and it's fast moving. We clearly haven't got those facts at our disposal at the moment, and I want to be in that position.
But I know that you worry about global turmoil in all sorts of different ways. By doing this kind of thing and having been accused by lots of people of multiple abuses of power, isn't your friend Donald Trump contributing to that global turmoil?
Well, two responses to that. Firstly, I do think that we're in a more volatile world than we have been for many, many years. And I'm really struck by the fact that what is happening internationally has much more of a direct impact on the UK than at any time that most of us can remember. And there are various reasons for that. There are conflicts around the world. There's climate issues going on. They're all impacting back on the UK. And that's why whenever I'm abroad on international work, I'm thinking about what's the impact back on the UK.
But the question
In
here
relation
isn't
to
your
the
big
relationship-
political friend making it worse?
Yeah, the relationship between the US and the UK is one of the closest relationships in the world. It is vitally important for our defence, for our security, for our intelligence. It is my responsibility to make sure that relationship works. As the Prime Minister of this country, working with the President of the United States. Not only have I stepped up to that responsibility, I have made it my business, and I do get on with President Trump.
But didn't Priti Patel as well hedge it a little bit, not wanting to condemn, emphasising the importance of international law?
Yeah, and Kemi Badenoch, also her boss now, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel, she essentially said, writing online, let's not rush to judgment here. No one will be shedding tears, I'm paraphrasing, but few will shed tears for President Maduro's leadership being over and his time in office in Venezuela being up. So you'd have a slightly different tone from the Conservatives, even though, of course, when they were in office, they also had the challenge of how do you manage Maduro? I mean, the UK doesn't have an enormously strong relationship with Venezuela. There are about 500 Brits, I believe, who are there. If newscasters, by chance, you have any relations or friends, or who knows, you're even there and listening, the advice is don't go, don't travel. The Foreign Office has got the usual kind of safety advice if you want to find it out.
I mean, he must have woken up as well.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Oh, God,
that...
I've got that woman coming in for an hour.
Well, not that, but we know Donald Trump was asked if he told Congress, and he said he didn't because they leak. Well, we can be pretty certain that he didn't pick up the phone to Prime Minister Keir Starmer then, I would imagine.
He was very clear to say that the UK had nothing to do with this.
Probably didn't know about it.
I would suggest that was the vibe. Well, he didn't want to spell that out. But yeah, it was one of those moments he could tell he was so carefully saying, well, I don't really have all the facts, except we do from almost the hour that the story broke. We had two very clear facts. The US struck a sovereign country and the US nabbed the leader of a sovereign country. There's no arguing about those two facts. There'll be lots and lots of arguments about all sorts of other things, but you can tell that Starmer's sort of pre-prepared line was, well, gosh, it's all very fast moving and I don't really want to say very much.
But I wonder how long it will take before they do make a decision. The French, among all the Europeans, have come out and they are crystal clear. This is a violation of international law. Paid Halles, the EU foreign policy chief, she said, and let's pick up on that point, that no one is going to be sad to see the back of Maduro. They all had very deep criticisms of him, wanted him to leave because he lost the election. But she also emphasized the need to respect international law. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said this was a very dangerous time. So when will Sir Keir Starmer come out and say, we too believe, is it a violation of international law? Should we criticize the United States? What will be his view and how quick will he express?
I don't think he will say it. I don't think he will say it, not least because his main rivals in Parliament, the Conservatives, who are still the main opposition, I don't think they'll say it. So I don't think they'll be pushing to him. So if I could, I'm very happy to be wrong on this podcast, as we will always say, but I would put a fiver that Ed Davies' question and Prime Minister's questions this Wednesday will be, was it or was it not illegal to drop bombs on Venezuela? But I don't think that Kemi Badenoch would ask that question too, and therefore the pressure on Keir Starmer will be different, and I don't think Reform will push him in that direction. So I think you'll have the Greens and the Lib Dems pushing him, and people from the left of his party, as they already are, saying we must condemn this. But I might be wrong by this time next weekend, but I find it hard to see a situation where Keir Starmer would, in terms, say, my big chum Donald has broken the
And
law.
there's another thing to mention here, which is of interest for 2026. It's the 250th of the Republic.
Yes.
And the King and the Prince of Wales are going over to take part in the celebrations. This new muscular gunboat diplomacy republic reaching back to the 19th century, as you've been saying. So the head of the British state is going to be at the centre of some of this muscular republic celebrations. So I wonder if I could just turn the dial a bit to how Americans might be reacting to this, because there was a lot of direct addressing in this news conference about troubles at home, about how the White House was clearing up crime-ridden Washington, D.C. So he's linking his strong arm abroad side to his strong arm at home side. And what can we say about American voters? They don't necessarily like more involvement, but this is being pitched directly to them as a good deal. They're going to get the oil, and you've got a president who does things. How do you think it could wash with American voters?
Well, some of the opinion polls before this happened said that only 25% of Americans would back this kind of military intervention in Venezuela. But yes, President Trump, in that, sadly, it was a rambling news conference, as they often are with President Trump, and he suddenly veered from talking about what was happening in Venezuela, and everyone was, ears peeled to find out what was happening. And suddenly he was talking about Washington, where he said crime has absolutely disappeared. He started talking about Louisiana, about Tennessee, and going through in great detail all of the places where the U.S. he's now sent in troops to make it a much safer place. So yes, he is saying that this is part of his broader approach to making the world a safer place for Americans.
So it'll appeal to his base, I think. The answer.
Well, we don't know. I mean, he came in, the MAGA, the Make America Great Again base, wanted him, and President Trump says, I agree, I don't want to see these forever wars. MAGA doesn't want forever war. They don't want this kind of, which is why Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of his great supporters, has now turned away from him. So let's see what Tucker Carlson and all those other big voices, what they start saying in the United States.
And also the very significant Latino communities in the US, right? Don't forget also Latino voters.
Oh, they will support, yes.
Right, and I believe, although there have been reports of celebrations in some parts of North America, and that big Latino vote in the US is also a very interesting demographic, although as with any demographic, no one in every demographic all thinks the same way or votes the same way, and it can be very lazy to make those assumptions. But that's a dynamic here too. Don't forget a huge part of what President Trump has been doing, which has been very divisive, popular with some, very unpopular with others, is massive immigration crackdowns. And he's connected Venezuela to that big immigration crackdown and sending agents in to grab people off the streets in American cities. So I think we can probably be sure whatever happens, it will be seen by some people as being very divisive. What that does for his popularity or lack thereof right now, I think it's really hard to predict this way that's going to turn.
But there's also the issue of precedent and what is going through the minds of President Putin in Russia, President Xi Jinping in China. The people were asking on social media today, what if President Putin declares, as he already has many times, that Volodymyr Zelensky is a threat to the national security of Russia, and he goes in and tries to pick him off? What will Sir Keir Starmer say then? What will others say then? What if others say, well, if the US can do it, if Donald Trump can say that this is in the interest of the United States, its national security, what's to stop us from doing it? And this is the shattering of what has been called the rules-based international order, never mind which rules benefit who, but a sense that the world was ordered in a certain way, that we don't have these violations of international law and these aggressions against other countries, that which now seems to be really becoming more fragile by the day.
This is the dilemma for Starmer, because he's someone who we know is genuinely very worried about the level of turbulence in the world and people just strong men doing whatever they want. And yet his closest international or his biggest international ally is someone who from time to time is demonstrating that he is also less than fond or respectful of the rules-based order. And one of the questions that we asked in the interview today was, you've always said it's clearly something to be condemned that Putin marched into a sovereign country and attacked it. What's the difference between that and President Trump dropping bombs on a sovereign country today? And you'll have to see tomorrow morning how he answered it, unless we've played that clip already.
No, we haven't. In fact, that does actually take us to the conclusion, because thanks to Lyse, we have had the best possible summary of how we got to where we got to when we woke up not knowing we were even going to get to the first step, let alone to the second step.
Whether we were going to make it to the office.
Yeah. So we are going to preview, Lyse, we're going to say thanks to you for doing such sterling service. You're going to be with us broadcasting on Radio 4 and BBC One, no doubt, tomorrow morning.
Hope so, yeah.
And then you have got a full interview with the Prime Minister.
We have. So, I mean, newscasters are no strangers, or if it's the first time you're listening, welcome along. Everybody knows that Keir Starmer had a hellish time in 2025, appalling poll ratings, and by the end of the year, a few people in his party calling openly for him to go. People like the leader of Unite, the party's biggest funder, saying there'd probably have to be a change of leadership. And he was in a big political hole. Can he survive 2026? That's the big question that overarches all of our politics for now. We know that there's Mega May coming down the tracks, as I'm annoyingly insisting on calling it, with elections not in every corner of the UK, but in much of the UK. So we sat down with him this morning for more than 45 minutes, actually. We thought, look, this is a kind of a huge critical moment. Would he be up for having a really long conversation, talking about all sorts of issues? And he had really interesting things to say. We talk about his survival, his future. He had very interesting things to say about Brexit and where the UK's relationship with the EU might go next, which I suspect might set some pulses racing and some veins throbbing in foreheads, but we'll see. We talk a lot about Ukraine and his hopes for peace in Ukraine and all sorts of other issues besides. But it's fascinating to me that at the beginning of what is such a critical year for him, that he's actually taken the risk of saying, you know what, yeah, I'm going to sit down and I'm properly going to go through this, and I'm going to do nearly an hour of speaking to you on BBC One.
I mean, that is retro.
It really is retro.
It's retro. This is the retro.
It really
part.
is retro. A Prime Minister has not normally done an interview of that length for a long time. And I mean, we can do a bit of the nerdy news, can't we? The newscast. Newscasters are often nerdy news hounds.
Proudly.
So normally if we do an interview with the Prime Minister, we might do kind of 28 minutes, something like that, maybe go to 30, and they wouldn't want to do more than that. So we might do sort of half of our Sunday morning programme. If they were doing a kind of a round of interviews with political editors, they might maybe do, kind of 7 minutes or something like that, maybe slightly longer. If they did the Today programme, they might do maybe kind of 15 minutes or something like that. And then in an election campaign, they all line up to do a sort of 28-minute, like a half-hour interview. They probably do one for BBC, one for ITV. It is a very long time since I can't remember another one of them doing a TV interview of that length. Podcasts have, got a bit fashionable these days and have done some longer chats, but it's a long time since something this long. And it'll be interesting, newscasters, tell us if you think actually it was a bore-a-thon, mainly because I was dull, or whether actually people enjoy listening to politicians in that kind of format, in that way. I don't know. It'd be really interesting to see.
I think a lot of people will be pleased to have a longer interview, because it's all this business of sound bites. You defeat the soundbite with a longer interview. That's the kind of the thing. That's what happens.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
We'll see. We'll see.
There we are. So that's a slice of action on BBC One tomorrow.
What are you doing on Radio 4?
We're going to do we're going to unpick the operation to seize Maduro from his bed. We've got a former assault helicopter pilot coming in to tell us how that happened. And as I've mentioned, we spoke to John Bolton.
Is he coming in a helicopter?
He won't be coming in a helicopter. Good question, because
Did you ask him?
I didn't. I haven't spoken to him yet.
Oh, I see.
So look, we say to Lyse, thank goodness. We say to you listening, thank heavens.
Yeah.
And we also say goodbye.
Goodbye.